Hi, it's Stuart Lancaster here, and Feargal Rourke. We are Leaders on Leaders Part 7. Sorry for the gap in communication. I was actually reflecting back and looking at the timeline. The last one we did was pre-season, 2024-25 season. We're now in May 2025. A lot's happened, and Fergal's here to quiz me about what's happened and what are the lessons learned for leaders out there. I'll let you go, Fergal. You can fire away with the questions.
Well, Stuart, it is great to chat to you again. And while we won't go into it in much detail, we're recording this the morning after one of your former teams have also hit a bit of a speed bump on the road this season. But let's
Yeah,
go back.
sorry, you just the audience. Yeah, Leinster just lost against Northampton in the
Uh,
European Cup semi-final. So
Yeah, which it's fair to say was a bit of a shock.
yeah,
But let's go back to you, Stuart. And it's interesting because when you and I were chatting about doing this, I went back over our previous podcasts and charted almost the evolution of the last 18 months or so. But just from where you stand now, your reflections really on your time at Racing, from the project part of it when you went in. And if I can kind of start the question around that, you talked about the transformation of a team and the transformation of a culture. And I suppose it did strike me, is rugby getting a bit like football? Do you get the appropriate time to effect that sort of a transformation? Like Sir Alex Ferguson at the time he was given seems like centuries ago at this point. But your own reflections on the 18 months or so.
yeah. So again, just for those who maybe haven't tuned in before or aren't aware, so I started Racing in July 2023. 4-year contract, and my contract was terminated by mutual agreement, if you want to call it that, on the probably about the 1st of February. So we're in May now. So it's been a couple of months since I've finished. Yeah, the last time we spoke, it was pre-season. First year, we came sixth in the league. We qualified for the playoffs, and we qualified for the last 16 in Europe. So it was around about the same sort of level of finishing that Racing had been achieving over the previous years. Racing had a very strong record in Europe, and top 14 in 2016, top 14 champions, 2018 European Cup finalists. But I was brought in with specifically the remit to transform and transition the team into a new team. And the project, as was described to me by the owner, Jack Lorenzetti, by Laurent Travers, the president, was to do that, to transform the team. So the first year was difficult, in that 18 players left, 9 new players came in. The second year obviously proved to be my last year. And one of my reflections, I think transformation does take time in an organization. Feels like you're turning around a ship to point it in a different direction, and you need a bit of luck along the way. So pre-season, I felt had gone well. We started the season playing in a place called Créteil, which is where, because the Olympics were on, because the arena wasn't available, our home games were playing in a place called Créteil. And we had a start of the season where the previous season we won tight games by 1 or 2 points. We just came out on the right side. And this season we came out just on the wrong side. One game against Bordeaux, we got beaten fair and square, but I think there were 5 games we lost virtually on the last play. And we had this sort of record of, win two, lose two, win one, lose one, so there was no consistency in the results. And very quickly that turns to pressure. The European campaign was similar. We ended up winning two, losing two in the pool stages, which ordinarily would have qualified you for the last 16, but it didn't this year through the way in which the other
Yeah.
pool played out. But we had some good wins along the way, but there was definitely inconsistency, and probably one of the biggest issues was discipline. Really, we had a lot of yellow cards, which put us under pressure. In fact, at one point, I said to the players, "Listen, we are top of the table of yellow cards, and it's causing us huge problems because we're playing a lot of the time with 14 men." So a big issue in terms of bringing referees in and trying to improve that. And also probably a couple of key men who we'd signed, Demba Bamba and Farrell not being able to play through injury, two of the key signings that I made. So the pressure was building around about Christmas time and post Christmas, and I certainly felt it as the leader. I felt I was doing three jobs at the same time, I guess, trying to recruit new players and deal with players who are out of contract, trying to manage the overall direction of the club, and trying to um, spend time with the president and with the owner. President Laurent Travers was in discussion with other clubs, so there was a bit of uncertainty about what he was doing. And I was ultimately trying to develop the younger players as well, and this new generation of Racing leaders that would take the team into the next 4 or 5 years. And in fact, when I reflect back, the day before the CAS game, which was my last game in charge, I presented to Jacques Lorenzetti a sort of vision for the future, where we're at. We have a good group of core leaders now. We have some good young French leaders starting to emerge, and we have this group of young academy players who are beginning to sort of make their way into the top 14. And obviously now I've left. I look at Racing and I see, the players I signed. I see the young players I talked about. I see the French players begin to take the lead. So I actually feel it's going in the right direction
Yeah.
still, even though I'm not there. Um,
And there's the chance of silverware this year with
yeah,
this.
yeah, yeah. And
Oh,
I mean, the irony is, we didn't qualify for Europe, but actually the Challenge Cup in terms of our evolution was probably um, a better record, a better chance of success. And with a chance to build, the next 2, 3 years to be really Champions Cup contenders, which I think Racing will be. And yeah, chance of silverware in the Challenge Cup. So yeah, but around that time, I got a sense that the confidence in the project was changing, and there was question marks about my ability to communicate effectively, in terms of language within the group. And I definitely got the sense that the walls were beginning to close in on me. And the CAS game, even though we lost 27-20, proved to be my last. I got a phone call from the agent that actually originally done the deal and said, "Oh, they've had a meeting and they want to terminate your contract." And that was that. I left.
and it a couple of strands that come out of what you were talking about there. In a sense, Stuart, when you're trying to transform a club or a company or an organization, you mentioned luck as one of the key components you need. You probably need alignment
Yeah,
of everybody in the organization, and you need backing and commitment.
yeah,
Is that conducive in sport where these, I think businesses can sometimes take a longer term view because they've got security over, they're not subject to change at the whim of an owner usually. But, did you clearly felt that change, that the time frame you had to deliver wasn't what you originally thought? Because certainly at the outset, you and I were talking about after the first season, you kind of felt, yeah, as the first season it was good, we now needed to kick on, etc. But you definitely saw it as a 3 or 4 year project. In reality, when the going got tough, the timeline seemed to concentrate or to shorten from the point of view of the owners. Just your sense of that sport business commitment alignment issue.
yeah, yeah. No, I think it's definitely. I mean, the threat of relegation in the top 14 um, adds another layer to it. You don't get that in the URC or in the Premiership now. You don't get it in Super Rugby, so top 14 is pretty unique in that regard. And there's 13 other teams who have all got good money, good models, good players, good coaches, and it's competitive. And sometimes the emotion of the crowd and the refereeing and the games sometimes in the top 14 feels like a different sport, to be honest. But in terms of the sport business analogy, I think it's true. I think it's happened twice now in my career, where you feel like you're working, you're brought in to do a specific job, and the people who sit above you say, "Yes, yes, we're behind you, behind you, behind you." And then, with England in 2015, I remember getting a phone call to say, "Oh, we're gonna, finish." And I said, "What?" And I'm going to leave completely. And they said, "Well, yeah." I said, "Well, why would you do that? Why'd you lose all that work
Knowledge.
and all that intellectual property and all that? I didn't understand at the time. So obviously, as you know, we went to Ireland and away we went. But yeah, I do think it is different in sport. I think one thing just for the people, there's only one team wins in sport,
Yes.
and everyone else loses. Um, so there's only one team going to win the Champions Cup, and every other team will be a failure. There's only one team going to win the top 14 or the league, and every other team will be a failure. And for the ownership, it's a question of understanding that that is the reality of it. There's one team that wins. So if you're to sack, or change the direction that you're going because you haven't won, then that's a lot of change. And the teams that genuinely, I think, go on to be successful in the long term, the teams that hold their nerve and stick with it. Or if there is a need to be change, if there is a need for change, then you do it in a systematic and proper review process, and you get 360-degree feedback, and you look at it from every angle. And if you feel, okay, this is definitely not working because person A hasn't got the skills, so it's not going the direction that we thought, then it should be done in a systematic way, not in a knee-jerk way. And
Yeah.
I think the teams that do that tend to hold their course longer, and are more successful in the long term.
Yeah, and in a footballing analogy, if you look at clubs like Brighton or Liverpool, where it's very much a systemic approach to leadership change, they seem to have got it right, as opposed to
Yeah,
the sky is falling in, we need a new man,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
let's play.
exactly.
One of the things, Stuart, when you were taking the job, and I remember discussing this with you in the first podcast about how you saw the role breaking down in terms, and it's clear your passion is being on the pitch, and your passion is teaching and training. And I recounted Jimmy O'Brien saying to me at one point that you were the best rugby teacher he had ever met in his entire career by some distance.
Mm.
And yet, as I dip back into the podcasts we've done so far, you were being pulled in different directions. Instead of being out in the pitch where you loved it, you were, as you mentioned there yourself, you're dealing with the composition of your squad, you're dealing with the owners, you're dealing with the media. What have you learned about what you like doing, what you think your perfect? Because some people would say you had your perfect role in Leinster because Leo was able to deal with the extraneous stuff, and you were able to do what you love best.
Yeah. Yeah, no, no. And, I've reflected a lot, particularly in the last couple of months since I've left Racing, about the decision to leave Leinster, and part of the reason I left Leinster, because 7 years I felt was, an appropriate time. The Racing, the challenge of going to the top 14, and, the promise that I would be in charge of the rugby program, and I would have people around me who'd help me do the other stuff. But as it transpired, particularly with obviously the change of president happened halfway through the season.
Yeah.
So Lauren left ultimately. Anna Tortolu came in. So that meant that there was a complexity to the role that added more pressure on me. And I tried to appoint people who I felt could take some of the load off me, but that didn't work basically. So I then ended up having to do it. So it felt a little bit like going back into the director of rugby role, head of recruitment role, as well as head coach role. And that director of rugby role, head coach role, with England was the same sort of feeling. So I'm not trying to shy away from the difficult conversations. I was happy to have the difficult conversations on selection or whatever, but I couldn't have worked any harder, Feargal. Honestly,
No, no.
I was like, and in France as well, the complexity of the language and everything else I was trying to manage, it was unbelievably difficult uh, job. So I think in hindsight, the next job, I definitely prefer the on-field coaching for sure. And ideally, if I could find an organization or a team that would allow me to do that, and still have a shape on, the leadership development of the group and everything else. I don't mind really if I'm the number one and number two. You can be a number one, I think, but have a good GM, have a good head of recruitment, So I think it's possible to do it where you can still focus on the rugby. or you do the sort of Stuart Lancaster, Leo Cullen, where you've got Leo's the number one and I was the number two. So I don't mind so much, but what I don't want to do again is be the number one, but then also be the director of rugby and the head of recruitment and everything else. That's it's not sustainable.
But I presume you have no regrets about, you'd have died wondering, I think, if
Yeah,
you
yeah, no,
hadn't
I've
taken.
definitely have no regrets of taking on the job. I've lots of regrets that it finished the way it finished. Like, I'm really sad uh, to not be able to say goodbye to anyone. We had a week off, and I got the phone call on the Monday of the week off to say they don't want to keep you, and that was the last communication I had from any of the senior management. I didn't have any communication with the senior management at the organisation, and it was all sort of concluded via an agent. So I returned back on the Saturday, signed the compromise agreement, and then packed up in Paris and left by the Tuesday. So I didn't, I just packed my
Wow.
bags.
It's as brutal as that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, there was no goodbye. And went to the office, just unpacked my yeah, office stuff. Everyone was off, obviously. Said goodbye in the WhatsApp group, left the WhatsApp group, and that was that. Came back to Leeds. Started walking the dog. And I was super fit. um,
Is this the same dog
but
you
no,
were walking in
look, I mean,
2015?
like I made a lot of, I really liked the players. I think the coaching staff, the management, I couldn't fault anyone's support, or the people, who I really sort of work closely with. And I miss a lot of the relationships that I developed there. I'm pleased, obviously, I still want them to succeed, because I look now at the players that are doing well and the players that I sort of brought in, or the young players, and it's nice to see them do well. So I've no, bitterness in that regard. I want Racing to do well. But I have a lot of regret that I couldn't see the project through to its end. Uh, and that'll be easier to deal with, for anyone who's been in a situation where you've been laid off, or you've been made redundant, or you've not got a job, you've been released from a role. The period afterwards is a tough period, because you're doing a lot of reflection, a lot of time on your own. You haven't got as much purpose, so you really want to get your teeth
Something different.
into something else. And we'll come on to it, I'm sure. But I got a couple of phone calls almost straight away, which then led down another chain of events over the last couple of months, which have been, in one way interesting and exciting, in another way very, very disappointed.
Well, let's come back to that. But just to close off on a couple of things you said there, you talked about delegating and empowering people to do various parts of your role. And yet, when push came to shove, you ended up taking some of those back onto yourself again. And I remember even in, I think it was episode 3 or 4, you were talking about your average day and you were up at 6 and you were at the other end. Have you learned about, I suppose for a lot of leaders, they would say it really brings home the importance of team, that, you can
Yeah,
be an
yeah,
executive, but you're nearly only as good as the team around you.
yeah, exactly.
Any reflections on that sense of team and when things don't go the way you want them to go in a team?
Yeah, yeah. No, I think it's not a case of me like control freak, like not wanting to delegate. I was happy to delegate, but the difficulty surrounding uh, the president leaving, a new president coming in, all of the sort of contractual stuff generally went through goes through the
Yep.
president. So that was a challenge. And within the coaching team and the management team, I was trying to find different ways to improve the team. So that's takes a lot of thought. And you say, I know you lose a game, and it's Saturday, and you've got to do the review on the Sunday, and you've got to think of a new way to sort of motivate the team, or explain away the defeat and find different solutions to improve performance. When you're in a team that's struggling to find confidence and belief, and some of your best players are injured or whatever, um, that's the extra load that that really begins to sort of sap your mental energy and physical energy. So I don't think it was a case of like too many jobs. It was a case of the main job not going as well as I wanted it to, you know what I mean, in terms of the performance on the field. And there were lots of different reasons for that. We were never a million miles away, but those, you know, those games that we could have won, we didn't. And it put us on under psychological pressure because of the competition. And also, I think there was a perception at the top end of the organization that we were a great team that we used to be. And the reality was that was a team that was great in 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019. This team was coming to the end of its cycle, and I was trying to rebuild a new team. That was difficult to manage, and obviously, you know, the relationship piece there becomes fractured a little bit again because of lots of reasons, change of president, language barrier, you know, etc. So you know, the managing up piece is critical. I was trying to do that, and probably I invested a lot of time in the managing up piece in the 2 weeks prior to my departure than I was doing on the coaching field, you know, which is not great when you're the head coach.
You referenced the England experience you had earlier on. These two instances are, you know, a national organization with a national board, etc., and effectively a club. And I suppose the business analogy might be almost a public company where you've got a board of directors and a private company which is owned by one or
Yeah.
two people. Um, is there a different dynamic in terms of that managing upwards when you're working for a national organization with a board versus a single dominant owner?
Yeah, I'd say so because obviously the single dominant owner can make a decision, you know, it's up to him, really. It's up to him. And whereas in a governing body, you know, there's more due process, but essentially it's the same principles, really. Like, you know, you've got to be aligned in what your vision is, you know, and you've got to be they 100% have to want you, and you have to 100% have to want to go there. And I think when I think back to the England role or this role, you know, that's how it felt at its best. And certainly at Racing, you know, it felt at its best because I really felt supported and secure, and that you know that they knew that it was difficult, but there was a transition taking place. Um, but it changes very quickly in sport. Like that changes very quickly, and I think my the lesson for me is to manage up better. The lesson for the boards or the people on the boards is to not make knee-jerk reactions and to try and see beyond the immediacy of the result. And if you are going to make a change, do it in a more systematic and forensic way, and make sure you've really, really done your homework as to why you're doing it, and involve more people in the process. So it's not knee-jerk, and you've thought about the short, medium, and long-term consequences of your decision.
That's a really insightful bit. And if I can bring you back, taking that approach you talked about to your time in Leinster, when you came in, Leinster were on the floor, and you know, you get a sense as an outsider, the organization was given the time and space. The leader, the coaching team were given the time and space. There was a system. Did you feel in Leinster when you came in that maybe it helped because you helped turn the ship around very quickly, but that there was that longer term approach?
Yeah, yeah, and I think no, definitely. I think the board of Leinster, Mick Dawson at the time, you know, very calm and considerate people, and you know, I think in the first year you know, helping it helps obviously because we lost it, we didn't win, you know, we lost in two semi-finals, but I think there was a general improvement. People could see the improvement, or they could see that there was young players coming through, and there was going to be uh, a team that was going to be worthy of investing in. Do you know what I mean? And I think obviously the big help was the second year we did the double, so that helped hugely, and that buys you time. And sometimes, you know, I was thinking about like England now with Steve Borthwick, and Steve Borthwick was at a critical period not so long ago, but England had a really, you know, successful Six Nations in the end. But there was one or two games that were absolutely pivotal in him winning. If he'd have lost, you know, the momentum really could have come on, you know, to make a change. So in sport, it can often be one game, which is completely unfair because you know that one game could be decided by a whole host of reasons that are not within the coach's control.
Well, that's interesting because had Finn Russell kicked the last minute conversion for Scotland and
Exactly.
had France managed to not drop six or seven of the balls that they dropped,
Exactly.
it could have been an entirely different season. He's now been seen as the savior for.
Yeah, yeah, and he's secure till 2027. So
Does, does does that unfairness in sport, Stuart, get to you? Can it get to you as a
yeah, no, no,
leader?
it does. It does. It definitely does. You know, the subjectivity of the refereeing decision making is the one that really, you know, obviously you look at yesterday's game. I'm not saying Leinster deserved to win because I thought Northampton were excellent, but you know, some of the decisions that are made in the game are so the grey areas, and you lose a bit of faith. You know, I definitely felt burnt out after Racing. And I felt a bit disillusioned, really, with what happened. With you know, why would I keep putting myself and my family in this position? You know, going into this crazy world of sport. You know, as a coach, and because you know that you know you can work every hour that God sends and coach the best you can, but ultimately still not be in control of the outcome. So there's definitely for the first time a sense of disillusionment for sure, I think. And I'm still probably working my way through that, if I'm being honest. It's not to say you know, I'm going to throw the towel in, I'll do something else, you know, or I'll just coach coaches or, you know, because, you know, at 55, there's a lot of strong
Yeah.
alcohol. Why would you keep putting yourself under this pressure, you know? Most coaches either, you know, get sacked or are waiting to get sacked. You know, why would you put yourself in that position? And that's how I felt initially after Racing. But then, you know, I'll come on to it. Like, you get a phone call from Australia, you get a
Yeah.
chance.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
But,
So,
but but in the context, Stuart, let's talk about you made a statement earlier that it's at its best where they want you and you want them.
yeah, 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 and that's you know Australia rang, and I definitely felt that's very strongly that they said, listen, you know, Joe's gonna finish after the Rugby Championship. We need someone to come in and help us. Lead into the 2027 World Cup. And I felt certainly burnt out, but then when the call came, I was like, I don't feel so burnt out anymore because I thought this is an exciting chance to go to a different country. I felt I'd learned a lot from England, Ireland, and France. I think diversity of thought in a country is really important, and I
Yeah.
thought that the knowledge I'd gained in those roles, the times coach in England, the pathway stuff I'd done, and the understanding of the pathways, the understanding of how the game's evolved in France. France's game plan is and style is very different to say Ireland's and England's. So lots of little things I felt I could bring, and also the excitement of going to work with what was obviously a talented group of players that I felt, having watched their games, could be improved quite quickly. And going into high performance environments in Australia, whereby you've got rugby league coaches, Aussie rules coaches, you know, their AIS is excellent, you know, so the excitement of going and learning from other coaches and passing on what you've learned in a new environment was appealing. And so yeah, when the call came, I'm like, okay, I don't feel so burnt out anymore. I really get the feeling that this is going to be something that I can commit to. The challenge from a family point of view is that they're thinking, okay, I put the family under pressure in lots of different ways now, and now I'm going to do it again by potentially going to live in Australia. What do you do? You know, my mum's 82. You know, what do you do with the two dogs? What do you do with, you know, can my wife make it out? Will I live on my own like I did in Leinster? And you know, so there was all that to consider. But at the time, you know, it was definitely positive.
And for people who might be aware, Joe Schmidt had announced he was going to leave after effectively in our autumn, and you would take over. That bit about family is interesting because it's one thing to be jumping across from Leeds to Dublin or Leeds to Paris. Leeds to Melbourne or Sydney is a
Yeah,
bit of
further.
a different and again and this is for in a business context as well when when you're trying to land somebody like you in an organization, if I think back to my previous role as a CEO, I think there are certain core principles you gotta have. You got to be very transparent, you got to be very honest, you've got to communicate really well. I do get a sense that you are now looking back over recent weeks saying that sort of process didn't really
No,
take
no,
here.
no, none of that happened really, and it's a shame because like the initial enthusiasm for the role remained. I mean, just for context, so this was the start of February,
Mm.
and the decision that was made, and when I finally realised I wasn't going to go to Australia was last week.
Yeah.
So we're talking nearly 3 months, nearly
With
3 months.
long periods of radio silence.
Well, you present your vision to the panel. You do a second interview. You meet key people. Um, you wait for feedback. And one of the lessons I would give any organization that's from my personal experience that I've just gone through is that there's say there's three or four candidates to interview for a role. Um, your decision as an organization whether you give that candidate the job or not is life changing for the candidate. If you don't give them the role, then obviously their life will carry on in the same direction. But if you give them the role, their life will change direction considerably. So you have a responsibility, I think, to be honest and transparent and consistent with your communication. So if someone presents, as I did, to a panel, and then I wait for feedback, then don't get any, then I chase the feedback up and say, what's happening? And, oh, we're going through the process. We'll be back in contact. And then, the do what you say you're going to do piece is actually critical now. So I'm give you my example. So obviously the time difference is their working days when I'm asleep, wake up in the morning. First question my wife asks is, have you heard from Australia? No, no, not today. Day follows, same question, same question. Eventually you start thinking, I'm gonna have to ring here to find out what's going on, because life's on hold. We don't know, and the shift in sands. Things are changing, but I'm not really clear on why they're changing. I don't mind if they're changing. I get it. I get the fact that in a complex recruitment process, there might be a different dynamic at play. They're interviewing different coaches. Or they're actually thinking, well, actually going to go down this route, not that route. Whatever. I don't mind. Just tell me. Don't not say anything. Everyone's grown up here, and we just need to know what's going on, and to not have that. The more and more it went on, the more disappointed I became, and in the end, I remember it was only last week. We get a phone call and say, actually, Joe's going to stay on now till 2026, and there is no job at all. And I was like,
Oh,
so for the last 3 months, I've sat waited and thinking, am I potentially going to live in Sydney? How would it work? And this is my vision for the role, and getting excited about it to a point where you start thinking, I'm not sure this is going to happen. And then to find out it's definitely not going to happen. I remember the feedback I gave. I said to the person that gave me the feedback, that said the situation changed, said, one of the rules of leadership, bad news should never come as a shock. I said, so if you've known this is potentially going to happen, you should have let me know.
yeah.
So at least then I could have moved on, and there's other opportunities out there. Why wait? So again, coming back to the sort of like how I'm feeling at the moment, the sort of the disillusionment piece, it's definitely not been helped by the process I've been through. I'm not so disappointed that I'm again still not going to commit to being a coach and to go and work in an organization. But it goes back to 100% want you to go, 100%, what they 100% they want you to come, 100% you want to go. It's so true. And I just got the feeling it slid from 100% to 60% to 50% to we don't want you at all now. And I wish they'd just told me that.
Yeah, I think that's a real lesson for business, and we've all been there. Circumstances change, but I think you always have to put yourself in the other man's shoes or the other woman's shoes
Yeah,
and sort of say, okay, this is a big deal for them. We've got
yeah,
to be honest. We've got to be forthright. We've
yeah,
got to bring them on the journey with us, even if that journey is starting to change now.
yeah, exactly. So hence I put the post out about the second set of eyes on LinkedIn, which
Yeah.
a lot of people saw. So I've proposed well, I've actually potentially got some consultancy roles coming up. So they don't often happen in sport. I think they're probably more in business. Feargal, correct me if I'm wrong, but like there's a couple of teams been in contact saying, yeah, we'd love you to come in. Just have a second set of eyes at our organization. What do you think? How would you beat us if you were playing against us? So that'd be a good thing to do. And in the meantime, there's other roles out there that'll come up. So, I'm keeping busy. And I'm not sat waiting for the phone to ring because I want to make sure I'm doing something productive and purposeful.
Yeah, I think the only example I can think of sports Graham Henry came into the Leinster environment to have a kind of but that was a kind of a holistic look at the
It's
organization.
similar though. I mean, yeah, no, the team has asked me, they're in the Southern Hemisphere and they're proposing 10 days. So it's very similar to the Graham Henry
Yeah,
yeah, Leo brought in. So, and I really think there are transferable lessons. I do, I think there are a lot of lessons that the Northern Hemisphere have learned that could really apply in the Southern Hemisphere and vice versa. So,
but
yeah,
not every
diversity of thought I think is important.
it's absolutely, but it's not every organization would have the confidence to bring in somebody like you to have a look because there would be some organizations feel, oh, he's going to point out all the things we're doing wrong, or and yet a good progressive organization will say, well, hang on to your point, diversity of thought is great. Surely he can help us be a better organization by pointing out with his vast experience of things we could be doing differently. So it's
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
I,
You're
I
not,
think
you're not trying to change anything, are you? You're just trying to say, listen.
here's
And I think one of the things that I've tried to do is say, listen, why don't I present first on what I've learned? I'm not coming in just to still
yeah.
judge. I'm going to present what I learned. I remember after 2015 with England, I went to Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and did the same thing. So I said, these are lessons I've learned from the World Cup. Please take them, and if you can use them, and then I get a chance to look at their organization as well, which is stimulating for me. But no, I think you're right. I think it's a coach or a head coach that's confident and in their own skin, and also there's a trust in my integrity, and I'd like to
Yeah.
think that should be there. Give my track record, and I'm not there to try and get someone's job. I'm just there to try and help, really, and that's where I get motivation from. Helping people learn from either my mistakes or my situation, hence this podcast, or yeah, or just from the experiences I've had.
So let's take stock, Stuart. You're 55, as you said. You're not quite 20 years in coaching, but you're not far off. If you could go back to the 35-year-old Stuart Lancaster in Leeds,
Yeah.
uh, what would you say?
Uh, I would say, if you said to me now, am I happy and fulfilled? If you'd have said to me at 35, you're going to go and you're going to coach England, you're going to win a Champions Cup, you're going to do the double, you're going to be in Champions Cup finals, you're going to coach amazing players, you're going to meet amazing people, you're going to travel the world. I'd have absolutely bitten your hand off. Because through the lens of a 35-year-old, like it's been incredible to get to 55 and achieve and meet the people I've met. But if you're saying to me as a 55-year-old, am I fulfilled? And I was actually having this conversation with my wife last night. I was talking about that difference between happiness and fulfillment. And happiness can change from a day on a day, and from an hour in a day. I can be happy in the morning and then I don't know,
Yeah.
crash my car and I'm not happy, you know what I mean? So that feeling of fulfillment. We had this interesting conversation. Some friends from university, we're all the same age, so 55-ish, and talking about one's retired, one's thinking about taking a retirement, one's giving up teaching and he's doing something else. And we went away for like a night away in Grasmere in Cumbria, and they were saying to me, "Oh, so you must be thinking you could wind things down a bit, take life a bit easier." And I was just like, I don't really think so. And they said they just couldn't understand why I was saying that. And I said, I don't feel fulfilled. I don't feel like I've fulfilled my life at the moment at 55. So I can't stop now. I want to feel fulfilled so that when I get to the end, I've helped people improve. I've made a difference. I don't want to get to the end and not feel like you've made a difference in some small way in to people, to players you've coached or to organizations, or you're not going to change the world, but you can still do your little bit. And so yeah, I definitely got the feeling of um, uh, frustration, and that I've still got more in me. So yeah, the next job will be key, I think, and the next opportunity, I think, wherever I go, in what direction, but also balancing that with the family and not you know putting so much pressure on them that that piece of the jigsaw remains unfulfilled. Do you know what I mean? It's not worked.
I think though the fulfillment bit only probably comes at the end, Stuart, because even, when you did the double and you won Champions Cup, many people might say you must be fulfilled now, but you're not. You're always looking to the next season. And I think myself,
I was going
it's
to say,
only
I've got you the question. You better to ask you. You're the one
no,
who's
no,
the
but
lawyer going.
I think certainly it's when you come to the end of your executive life and you move into a new non-executive phase, you then look back and say, am I happy I did everything I could? But if you'd asked me with a year or 2 or 3 years to go, I said, no, no, I want to do more. I want to do more. It's only when you get to the end, you say, did I fulfill my potential? Did I do everything I
No.
wanted to do? And then you say, so what's next, Stuart? Now you're 55. You've got plenty of gas in the tank. You probably won't go back to France. You've mentioned a few times the language, and
I'm
it's a
still doing my French lessons. I've got like so much better, and so I'm still doing my French lessons. I don't know if I wouldn't say no ever to go back to France.
okay.
Obviously, I probably wouldn't go back as a number one. I'd go under a French number one probably. But I think I could definitely go back in an organization that was motivated and could see potential. I don't think it'd be the next job,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't say no to that. The Southern Hemisphere will always had that attraction, but the Australia thing's now not going to happen. So, New Zealand tend not to appoint, coaches from
Yeah.
outside New Zealand. So I think there might be one or two chances to build relationships in South Africa, which I would be keen to explore. And obviously in the Northern Hemisphere, there's jobs,
Oh, yeah.
there's club jobs and there's international jobs coming up. So, but again, it goes down to fit, and they've got to want you, and you've got to want to go.
But it
So,
sounds like, because one of the things you mentioned earlier, Stuart, is options have been, say, a coach of coaches, and certainly even in the Irish media, there will be people who'd love, I'd suspect, to have you back as shaping the Irish coaching system. But when I hear you talk, you still want to be at the coalface. You
yeah,
still
yeah,
want,
yeah,
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 to
yeah,
to
yeah. I think that's probably something I didn't talk about actually. One of the things that happened during this season, that I've just left racing. So my mentor, Kevin Bowring,
yes.
he passed away tragically in October. So he had a heart attack and he died, and I was privileged to be asked to do his eulogy, and I think the emotion of that week in my life, and of Kevin not being there has definitely had a profound effect on me. And I do think um, I do want to do a Kevin Barron role in the future. That sort of coach the coaches. I think there's things I can offer. Yeah, I get really motivated by helping. I say young coaches, but call them 35, 40-year-old, 45-year-old coaches. And I also tend to always reach out to coaches who are struggling, because I know what it feels like, how lonely it is. I'm doing something for the League Managers Association. So in football in England, they have like a mentoring scheme and also a counselling scheme for managers, which I think is really important. Because again, that lonely leader role when you've not got a
Yeah.
job or whatever. And I've been through, the ups and downs of sport. I've been through a lot of it. So I'm on their program as someone who can support. So I'm available to do things there for football, which I think is good. I'm doing some stuff for UK sport in England, and generally, whenever a coach reaches out, and generally, I'm not talking about the top end coaches all the time. Lots of coaches reach out in different ways. I try and help where I can and pass on what I've learned. Again, I get real motivation out of that. But you know, and I could see a future in that. But I love the relationship with the players. I love coaching players. I think as a 55-year-old, by coaching 25-year-olds, it keeps you young, and I
Yeah.
feel I've still got an ability to connect. So, and I back myself for sure. In terms of my knowledge of the game. the experiences I've had. And going back to the teaching, I think once a teacher, always a teacher type thing. So yeah, I think a coaching job leading into coach the coaches in the future.
We've talked about great sports stroke business books. The score takes care of itself. Is there a Stuart Lancaster business sports book? Could there be one?
No, I mean, actually, this the guy who's ghostwritten a few books contacted me and said, "Oh, listen, I'd like to have a go." And I was trying to explain to him about like the type of book I'd like it to be, which I think is quite hard to do. Like Johnny Sexton wrote his book, and I think Johnny's book is good because he doesn't just talk about the chronological timeline of his career. He talks
Yeah.
about the lessons he's learned and what he could have done better. And I think there's something in that type of book. Um, so then I started thinking, well, maybe you just write it yourself. If you want it in the first person, you write down your thoughts. But actually, there's a real skill in that I've
Yeah.
worked out. Is like that's not easy to do. And then so if you are going to get someone to do it, you've got to have a ghostwriter who knows you and can speak as you. So I think it's a long way off, but I do think that uh, those coaches who inspire me, they've passed away now, but their books are their legacy. And there's definitely something to be done for me, I think there, but I don't know how. I don't know how.
There's a tantalizing thought.
Yeah, I just need to, yeah, I need to figure out a way about how to get my words onto paper.
Well, Stuart, personally, can I say it's been a wonderful series. Been talking to you, your evolution. I've learned a lot. I'm sure people listening have learned a lot from your experiences and your insights. But I've a funny feeling it's not the last we're going to be hearing of Stuart Lancaster, and maybe we'll end this podcast with "to be continued."
Yes, I don't know when though. I don't know when. So, okay, Fergal, thanks very much.
Thanks a million.